Hello, my name is Scarlett. I want to tell you about my journey, how I learned to speak English naturally. Not from a textbook, but from real life, step by step. You know, when I say I learned English naturally, I don't mean I woke up one day speaking fluently. It was nothing like that. In fact, it all started in the most ordinary way, with frustration, a dictionary, and a decision that changed my life. I still remember the exact moment I decided to learn English for real. I was 17. I had just watched a movie, The Pursuit of Happiness, and I was crying by the end of it, not just because of the story, but because I couldn't understand half of what they were saying. I had to rely on subtitles, and even then, I felt like I was only getting the surface of the emotion, not the soul of it. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought, how do people speak like that? So natural, so smooth, so full of feeling? I wanted that. I didn't want to just know English. I wanted to live it. I wanted to think in English, dream in English, laugh in English. So I made a promise to myself. From now on, English would be part of my daily life. It started with the smallest steps. Every morning, I'd wake up and greet the day in English. Good morning, Scarlett. How did you sleep? I'd say it out loud to myself, even if it felt silly. At first, it was just repetition. But slowly, it became natural. I changed the language on my phone to English. That helped me connect with it in everyday life. Weather apps, messages, settings, every click became a tiny lesson. I began to notice how often I used certain words, how instructions were written, how new vocabulary appeared in the places I used every day. Even the word reminder started to feel like a friend saying, "Don't forget your goal today." Then came music. Music became my secret classroom. I picked artists like Adele, Ed Sheeran, and Taylor Swift. I'd listen to a song on repeat, first just for fun, then again with the lyrics in front of me. I'd sing along, line by line. Sometimes I'd stop and search up a phrase like rolling in the deep, or thinking out loud, just to understand what they really meant. I started keeping a small notebook, a plain one with a soft brown cover, and I wrote down every new word or phrase I learned. That notebook became my little treasure. The real breakthrough came when I started watching cartoons in English. You might laugh, but cartoons are amazing for learning because they use simple, clear language and lots of expression. Shows like Peppa Pig, SpongeBob SquarePants, and Dora the Explorer became my teachers. I wasn't embarrassed because I wasn't doing it to entertain myself. I was building my foundation. I'd pause after every sentence and try to repeat what they said in the same tone, the same rhythm. I started mimicking their speech, not just the words, but how they moved their mouths, how they paused, how their voices went up or down. That's when I realized something important. If you want to sound natural, you have to feel the language, not just learn the grammar rules. I stopped memorizing vocabulary lists and started listening, really listening, to how people spoke. Around this time, I also made a rule for myself. No more watching movies or YouTube videos in my native language. Only English. I started with subtitles, but slowly, I pushed myself to turn them off. I'd sit with my notebook, pause scenes, write down interesting expressions, and even try to rewrite a short dialogue in my own words. I was clumsy at first, but it got better. I remember one scene from Friends where Joey said, "How you doin'?" I must have repeated that line 100 times, just to get the tone right. And then came the mirror. Oh yes, the mirror. Every night, I stood in front of it and spoke to myself in English. It was awkward. Sometimes I'd freeze because I didn't know what to say. But I'd force myself to keep going. I'd pretend I was in a conversation. I'd imagine someone asking, "What did you do today?" And I'd answer like I was really talking to them. At first, it was just sentences like, "Today I went to the market." But after a few weeks, my sentences became fuller, more expressive. "Today I went to the market, and I saw a woman arguing with the shopkeeper." It was funny because she kept saying, "This price is robbery." See, I was building stories. Not perfect ones, but real. It wasn't easy, though. There were days when I felt like giving up, when I couldn't find the right word, or I pronounced something wrong, or I forgot everything I thought I had learned. I'd cry sometimes, I'll be honest. But every time I felt like quitting, I'd open that little brown notebook and look at how far I had come. Page by page, line by line, I had built something. I had built me. One unexpected thing that helped me a lot was labeling things around my house. I took sticky notes and wrote English names for everything. Mirror, door, toothbrush, refrigerator, remote control. My room looked like a vocabulary jungle, but it worked. I was surrounded by English words every day. Slowly, without realizing it, English became part of my brain's wiring. I started thinking in English. When I looked at my cup of tea, I didn't say chai anymore, I said tea. When I was hungry, I didn't say bhook lagi hai, I said I'm starving. These small shifts were signs of a big change inside me. And then something magical happened. I was walking to the local shop one evening, listening to a podcast in English, something about storytelling. I was so focused on what the speaker was saying that I didn't realize I had crossed the entire street without translating a single word in my head. I understood it. I was following the story in real time. It was like my brain had switched to English mode, without asking me. I stopped in my tracks and smiled. That was the moment I knew. This is working. I'm becoming natural. But I also knew that speaking alone wasn't enough. I had to interact. I needed real voices, real reactions, real people. So I made the next big decision of my journey. After all those weeks of living in English, watching, listening, writing, and talking to myself in the mirror, something inside me changed. I wasn't just studying English anymore. I had formed a personal relationship with it. It was no longer a subject. It was like a friend who stayed with me all day. But still, something was missing. Even though I could understand movies better, sing along to songs, and speak to myself with more confidence, I knew I was still living inside a bubble. It was like building a beautiful voice, but with no one to hear it. I needed real people. Real conversations. Real moments that didn't feel like practice, but life itself. The first time I tried speaking English with another person, my hands were sweating. It was on a language learning app, one of those where you can find language exchange partners. I still remember the screen name of the first person I messaged, Tom from Canada. He was learning Spanish, and I was learning English, so we agreed to help each other. I stared at the message box for 5 whole minutes before typing. Hello, Tom. I'm Scarlett. I want to practice English with you. I read it 3 times before I hit send. And then I waited. My heart was beating fast, as if I had just taken a huge risk. When he replied, I felt both excited and terrified. Hi, Scarlett. Nice to meet you. Sure, let's practice. We started texting at first, just to break the ice. He used simple English, and I responded slowly, carefully, looking up words when I didn't know them. At first, I'd take 10 minutes to write a single sentence. I was so afraid of making a mistake. I wanted every word to be perfect. But Tom was kind. Every time I said something awkward or used the wrong tense, he didn't laugh or correct me harshly. He would just respond naturally, and sometimes repeat the correct version without even pointing out the error. That helped me a lot. I realized that real conversations aren't about perfection, they're about connection. Soon, we moved to voice messages. That was scary. The first time I heard my own voice speaking English out loud and sending it to another person, I cringed. I thought I sounded weird, too slow, too unsure. But I sent it anyway. Hi Tom, I just wake up. No, I just woke up. And now I'm making tea. I laughed at myself after sending it. But Tom replied with a cheerful voice message. Good morning. I just had my coffee. And by the way, you said it right the second time. I just woke up. Great job. That tiny bit of encouragement made me feel like I had climbed a mountain. One small sentence, one small correction, and yet the confidence it gave me was huge. After that, I started looking for more people to talk to. I joined English-speaking Facebook groups, Reddit threads, and even Discord servers for learners. I wasn't the only one trying to get better. There were thousands of people like me, from all over the world. Some were beginners, some were fluent, but we all had one thing in common. We wanted to connect through English. One night, I joined a live voice chat on Discord. I almost didn't click the join button. I hovered over it for a minute, scared. But I pushed myself. I took a deep breath, clicked, and said, "Hello, can anyone hear me?" Silence for a second. Then someone replied, "Hi. Welcome. Where are you from?" And just like that, I was in. My voice was shaking, but I answered, "I'm from Pakistan. I'm learning English." The person replied, "Cool. Your English is good. How long have you been learning?" That sentence, "Your English is good," felt like a gift. It made all those hours of mirror practice, all the notebook scribbles, and all the cartoons worth it. From then on, I made a habit of speaking with someone in English every day, even if it was just for 5 minutes. Sometimes it was voice, sometimes video, sometimes just messages. But I made sure I had one real human interaction in English daily. I started to notice things in myself. My hesitation began to fade. My sentences flowed more smoothly. I started using phrases I had heard in shows, like, "I mean," or "you know what I mean." I wasn't just speaking English. I was sounding natural. I even started making jokes. They weren't always funny, but the fact that people laughed, or at least pretended to, meant I was connecting. One of the most powerful things I did during this time was join a local English-speaking club. Yes, in real life. It wasn't easy. I had to travel across the city once a week. The meetings were held in a quiet cafe, where about 12 to 15 people sat in a circle and talked in English for an hour. I was the youngest there at first, and probably the most nervous. But I still remember my first session. The topic was, if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go? When it was my turn, my palms were wet again. My voice cracked. But I smiled and said, if I could go anywhere, I would visit London. Because I love the British accent, and I want to see the Big Ben with my own eyes. There were a few chuckles and kind nods. One older man said, "That's a good choice, Scarlett. And well spoken." It was just a short answer, but it was my first step into a real English-speaking environment. And it felt like home. After that, I never looked back. I started volunteering at a community center that helped tourists. Just once a week. My job was simple. Giving directions, helping people with maps, answering questions in English. But every time I helped someone, I gained more than just practice. I gained belief. I was using English to help people. To connect. To contribute. And then came one of the biggest milestones of all. My first English video call with someone I had never met before. It was a language exchange video call with a girl from Japan. Her name was Aiko. We had been messaging for a few days and decided to talk on a Saturday evening. When her face appeared on the screen, and she smiled and said, "Hi, Scarlett." I was nervous, but I felt ready. We talked about everything. Our cultures, food, our favorite books. We laughed about silly mistakes and shared funny expressions from our native languages. By the end of that 30-minute call, I felt like I had made a friend for life. I'll never forget what Aiko said at the end. "You speak English with heart, not just words." That sentence stayed with me, because it was true. I had stopped worrying about grammar rules. I had stopped translating in my head. I was speaking from the heart. That's what speaking naturally really means. But let me be honest. Not every conversation was smooth. Some were awkward. Sometimes I didn't understand the accent. Sometimes I blanked out mid-sentence. Sometimes people were rude or impatient. But I learned to let those moments pass. I told myself, every mistake is a brick in the house you're building. So I kept going. Little by little, English stopped being something I learned. It became something I lived. I started writing posts in English. I shared my thoughts on Instagram. I wrote short diary entries. I even started a blog where I wrote simple stories from my life. First for myself, then for a few followers, and then for hundreds. And you know what happened? People started messaging me, asking, "How did you become so fluent?" I smiled every time. Because I knew the answer. One real conversation at a time. I didn't just study English. I used it. I made mistakes. I repeated phrases. I listened. I replied. I laughed. I cried. I connected. That's how I made English mine. Looking back on everything, I realized that speaking English naturally wasn't about learning hundreds of grammar rules or sounding like someone else. It was about letting myself grow through real experience. From practicing alone in my room to connecting with real people across the world, every step I took brought me closer to fluency, but more importantly, to confidence. I stopped chasing perfection and started building real conversations. I stopped being afraid of mistakes and began treating them as part of the process. Speaking English naturally is not about speaking without flaws. It's about speaking without fear. And now, when I speak, I don't worry about being correct. I focus on being clear, being honest, being myself. That's what truly changed everything. Because in the end, it wasn't just my English that became fluent, it was me. I became fluent in expressing who I am. And that is the most natural way to speak any language.